Welcome to Hardscript.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. She called my boundaries controlling. That's the sentence that ended 8 years of marriage. Not infidelity, not violence, just that one accusation, dropped like a grenade across a table at Panera Bread on a Tuesday afternoon. The same place where we used to share soup and split a sandwich after Sunday errands. Now she sat across from me with her iced coffee, rehearsed calm, telling me she'd been doing inner work and realized I was limiting her emotional space. My name is Ethan Cole, 41 years old, architect. I build things that last, bridges, offices, order. I've spent my entire career drawing lines that keep chaos out. That's what I thought marriage was too. Structure, boundaries, trust. Claire, my wife, used to call that stability. Then she started calling it control. She'd recently finished some online certification to become a life coach. Started posting about self-worth and energy alignment. Our kitchen turned into her office. Our mornings turned into monologues about choosing joy. Then she met him, Dr. Miles Harland, psychologist, author of a self-help book with a Barnes & Noble display shelf of his own face, smiling above the words freedom from toxic love. Claire said he was mentoring her, helping her expand. That afternoon, as she spoke about personal sovereignty, I didn't argue. I just listened. That's what I always did. She said Miles made her realize that healthy love has no walls. That phrase stuck to me like static. I asked, calmly, "So what's the alternative?" "No walls at all." She smiled, as if pitying me for not understanding enlightenment. That night, she stayed in her office late, on Zoom, her laughter spilling through the closed door. I walked past, saw her on screen, leaning toward her camera, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in months. Her tone, the one that used to belong only to us, was now public property. I went to bed without a word. The next morning, she left a note by the coffee maker. "I'm attending a workshop this weekend, personal development. Don't wait up." By the time she came home, her voice had changed. Softer, rehearsed. She used words like space and alignment. And when I asked if something had happened, she said, "Ethan, I can't live in a blueprint anymore. You build boxes. I need open sky." I didn't answer. I just nodded, cleaned my coffee mug, and went upstairs to my desk. I opened Apple Notes and typed one line. Silence is not control, it's closure. It wasn't anger I felt that night. It was precision, the quiet kind that starts before everything else falls apart. Claire started spending her evenings at study circles. That's what she called them. Small gatherings of people learning how to release control and live authentically. The words sounded like an exit strategy, I just didn't know from what yet. I'd come home from the firm, find candles burning, her laptop open to another webinar featuring Dr. Harland. His voice filled the house like a sermon, smooth and convincing. He talked about how boundaries are just fear wearing good manners. She'd nod along, taking notes like a student chasing enlightenment. At first, I thought it was harmless. Everyone needs a hobby. But it wasn't a hobby, it was a conversion. Our conversations turned into lectures. If I asked about our plans, she'd tell me I was trying to control outcomes. If I mentioned the mortgage, she'd say I was operating from scarcity. It was like she'd downloaded a new language where reason was the enemy. One night, I stopped by her workspace, tried to talk about something real, about us. She looked up from her phone, said she was messaging Miles about her coaching niche. I asked if she thought it was appropriate to share personal issues with him. She said Miles was a licensed professional, that I was just threatened by her growth. Then she smiled, small and sharp, and said the sentence that stayed with me for weeks. "You don't protect me, Ethan. You cage me." After that, I stopped arguing. Architects know when a structure can't be saved. I focused on work. Spent longer hours at the office, redrawing plans, perfecting every line, maybe because it was the only place left where logic still mattered. My Volvo sat in the garage most nights. I took long walks instead, thinking about how silence used to mean peace, but now meant distance. 2 weeks later, Claire invited me to one of her group sessions. I said no. She went alone, came back glowing like someone who'd found religion. She said Miles told her that my need for predictability was a form of emotional dominance. She said she finally understood that her boundaries weren't walls, they were wings. I looked at her then and realized something painful. The woman I'd married didn't exist anymore. She'd been replaced by someone who smiled at chaos and called it healing. That night, I slept in the guest room, not out of anger, but to measure the distance she'd already created. Sometimes space is the only way to see the whole design before it collapses. The first rail crack appeared at Barnes & Noble. She told me she was going there for a book signing, said it was a professional opportunity. When I looked it up later, it wasn't a signing. It was one of Miles Harland's lectures. The topic was predictable, breaking free from emotional containment. I didn't go, but I saw the photos afterward. She posted them online. Her in the front row, notebook in hand, his arm around her shoulder in a group picture. The caption read, "Learning to breathe again." I didn't confront her. I just watched. Quietly. The next morning, she acted normal, made her smoothie, hummed while scrolling through her phone. She said the event was transformational. I noticed how she said we, not he. We talked about freedom. We explored boundaries. We. The pronoun of shared guilt disguised as growth. After that, small changes became patterns. Her sessions ran later. Her phone never left her hand. She started wearing different clothes, flowing, bright, as if she'd shed structure entirely. At dinner, she'd quote Miles like scripture. "Control is just fear pretending to care," she'd say, smiling like she'd uncovered a secret truth. I tried to meet her halfway, asked if she wanted to go away together for a weekend. She said retreats were for codependent couples who still believed in fixing things. That one stung. We ate in silence after that. She spent the night in her office again, light glowing under the door until morning. At work, my colleagues noticed I was quieter than usual. I buried myself in blueprints and renderings. Order became my only language. I started running on weekends, long distances through empty neighborhoods, tracing clean lines with my steps just to remember what discipline felt like. A month later, I got a call from a mutual friend. He said he'd seen Claire and Miles at a restaurant downtown, Panera Bread, of all places. The same table where she once told me I was controlling. I didn't react, just thanked him and hung up. I already knew. That night, she came home smelling like someone else's cologne and said she was helping a friend through an emotional breakthrough. I nodded. No confrontation. No raised voice. Just an architect's awareness that a building doesn't collapse in one day. It leans for months before it falls. When she finally went to bed, I sat alone at my desk, opened Apple Notes again, and wrote one sentence. Blueprint complete. Demolition begins. When someone starts believing that rules are prisons, you can't reason with them. You can only step back and let them discover what chaos feels like alone. After that night, I stopped asking questions. I became an observer in my own home, moving quietly through rooms that no longer belonged to me. Claire's voice, once warm and unguarded, now carried the rhythm of rehearsed wisdom. Every sentence started with a phrase she'd borrowed from Miles. Every opinion was an echo. I began to notice how often she mentioned him, even when it didn't fit the conversation. "Miles says you can't control love," she'd say while scrolling her phone. "Miles believes people cling to structure when they're afraid to feel." It was like living with a mirror that only reflected someone else's light. The irony was painful. She accused me of control while orbiting a man who dictated how she should think, feel, even breathe. At work, my team was finalizing a museum renovation. I found comfort in it. There, every line had purpose, every wall supported something else. When I came home, the opposite waited. Improvisation disguised as freedom. Claire had started running client retreats in our living room. Strangers sat on our couch, sipping tea, repeating affirmations about liberating the self. I'd pass through quietly, nodding when they smiled. The house smelled like incense and emotional exhaustion. One evening, after everyone left, Claire sat across from me and said she needed radical honesty. She told me she and Miles had crossed an emotional boundary, but insisted it wasn't betrayal, it was authenticity. She said, "Healthy people don't label connection as sin." Then she added the line that split something inside me. "You should thank me for showing you how control kills love." I didn't speak. I just looked at her, at the woman who'd built a new identity out of borrowed words. Then I stood, washed my plate, and said goodnight. That night, I opened a blank document on my MacBook and started listing everything that was still mine: bank accounts, property, clients, passwords. Not out of spite, out of clarity. Architects don't destroy, they redesign. By morning, I'd already made the first move. Quiet. Precise. The kind she wouldn't notice until the foundation was gone. The morning after her confession, I made coffee, same as always. She came downstairs wearing one of those linen wraps she'd started favoring, eyes puffy but calm. She said she hoped we could process this with compassion. I nodded, poured my coffee, and listened. She spoke for 10 minutes straight. About emotional truth, spiritual awakening, how guilt was a construct of the ego. Her tone was rehearsed, like she was practicing for a podcast. I didn't interrupt once. When she finished, she asked what I was feeling. I said focused. That word seemed to confuse her. She asked if I was angry. I told her anger was energy without a plan, and I'd never been one to waste resources. That's when she said it, the line that sealed everything. You're proving my point, Ethan. You need to control even this. Control. The word that had become her anthem. I smiled, quietly, and told her she was right. Then I left for work and didn't come home that night. I stayed at a small Airbnb across town. Clean, anonymous, efficient. The kind of space that didn't ask for meaning. I spent the evening reviewing my notes, calling my lawyer friend about transferring accounts, and updating my portfolio. Every action was a line on a new blueprint. Over the next 2 weeks, I built my exit like a structure, methodical, silent, perfect. I transferred my firm clients to private contracts, set up new accounts under my name only, rerouted mail, and leased a small studio in another city. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't need to. Claire was too busy hosting workshops on radical freedom. She probably thought my quiet meant surrender. One evening, I drove home to pack a few things. She was on another video call with Miles, voice soft, full of admiration. She didn't even notice me walking past. I picked up my sketchbook, laptop, and a box of personal files. When I left, she was laughing at something he said. On my drive back, headlights reflecting on the windshield, I realized I wasn't running. I was finishing. Boundaries weren't control. They were structure. And for the first time in months, I felt the steady calm of a man rebuilding something that would never again be shared, borrowed, or broken. 2 weeks passed before she realized I was gone. I'd left quietly, no confrontation, no dramatic goodbye. Just a house key on the counter and a short message in Apple Notes, pinned to the screen of my laptop. Silence is not control, it's closure. By the time she read it, every document had been transferred, every account restructured, every legal tie accounted for. I hadn't erased her. I'd simply removed myself from her system. I moved into a small apartment above an old coffee shop near downtown. The noise helped. Steady, predictable. I rebuilt my practice from scratch, designing minimalist spaces for clients who valued simplicity. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent years with a woman who despised structure, and now people paid me to create it. My days became routines again. Wake up, run, design, sleep. No explanations, no emotional negotiations. A month later, I got a notification on LinkedIn. Claire had viewed my profile 3 times in 1 week. The same profile that now listed my new studio and location. I knew she wanted to reach out, maybe to reclaim her version of closure, but I'd disabled messages. Control, she would have called it. I called it peace. A mutual friend told me she'd been posting online about choosing herself after emotional imprisonment. Miles was still in the background of those photos, lectures, workshops, the usual audience applause. I didn't feel anger anymore, only distance, like I was watching an old film where I already knew the ending. One night, I sat by the window with my notebook, sketching a new project, an open concept home with clean lines, natural light, and a single reinforced wall at its center. A quiet metaphor, maybe. Every design starts with boundaries. Without them, nothing stands. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I didn't realize how much silence can hurt. I read it twice, then deleted it. She once said that healthy people don't live by rules. But standing there, in a space built by my own discipline, I finally understood. Rules aren't prisons. They're the beams that hold everything up when love decides to collapse. Claire reached out through mutual friends first. Small messages slipped into conversations. How was I doing? Did I seem happy? Did I mention her? I didn't. I'd already moved into a different rhythm, one she couldn't interrupt. My days revolved around structure again. Clients, sketches, Long drives in the car through quiet neighborhoods where the world made sense in straight lines and solid edges. Sometimes I'd stop at Panera Bread for lunch, the same place where everything had started to end. It didn't hurt anymore. It just reminded me how easily people confuse comfort for connection. A few weeks later, she sent an email. The subject line read, "No walls this time." Inside, she wrote that she'd left Miles, that she finally realized freedom without boundaries is just chaos dressed as courage. She wanted to meet. I read it 3 times, then archived it. I wasn't angry or tempted, just finished. I started noticing how quiet could become its own kind of sound. It filled rooms without demanding attention, steadied the pulse. My studio grew faster than I expected. A corporate client wanted an eco-housing complex. Another commissioned me for an art center. Precision was back in my life, and I guarded it the way I once guarded her. One night, while driving home, I passed a bookstore, Barnes & Noble, glowing through the glass. A poster outside advertised a new workshop, Dr. Miles Harland, Healing Through Release. Claire's name wasn't there this time. For the first time in months, I felt nothing, no bitterness, no nostalgia. Just calm detachment, the kind that comes when a blueprint finally meets completion. Later that week, I found an old folder on my phone, photos of us during better years. Vacations, dinners, laughter that once felt permanent. I deleted them without hesitation. The past didn't need preservation. It had served its purpose. Before bed, I opened Apple Notes again and typed, "Freedom isn't the absence of rules. It's the mastery of restraint." I closed my laptop and turned off the lights. Out the window, the city was quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't ache anymore. The kind you earn after choosing discipline over drama. And for the first time in a long time, that silence felt like home. The first time I saw her again was by accident. I was driving through a different part of the city, scouting a potential site for a new project, when I spotted her outside a cafe. She was sitting alone at a corner table, headphones in, eyes fixed on her phone. No candles, no audience, no glow of borrowed wisdom. Just Claire, stripped of the performance. For a moment, I almost stopped. Almost. But some structures aren't meant to be rebuilt. I kept driving. Later that night, I received another email. She wrote that she'd started therapy, real therapy this time, not the kind that feeds the ego. She said she was learning that boundaries aren't prisons, they're proof of respect. That she finally understood what I'd tried to build with her. I didn't reply, not out of cruelty, but because some apologies arrive after the foundation is gone. My new studio had just finished its first major contract, a private residence on the edge of the lake. Clean geometry, panoramic glass, walls positioned for light and privacy in equal measure. A house with lines that guided rather than confined. The client called it peaceful. I called it truth in concrete form. Work became my rhythm again. I'd start early, finish late, eat at Panera Bread or sometimes cook at home, the silence around me becoming less like emptiness and more like design. People around me started saying I looked lighter, calmer. Maybe because I'd stopped carrying someone else's chaos disguised as love. One evening, as the sun set behind the half-finished skyline, I parked near the waterfront and watched the lights stretch across the buildings. That's when I realized something simple but final. She hadn't broken me. She'd just tested the structure, and I'd proven that it could stand. Before heading home, I opened my phone, found her message still sitting unanswered, and archived it for the last time. Some walls exist not to keep people out, but to keep dignity in. When I got back to my apartment, I wrote one last line in Apple Notes. Boundaries aren't about control. They're how you know where you end and peace begins. Months went by. I didn't hear from her again, but echoes of our life together showed up in unexpected places. A mutual friend sent me a link to a podcast, Claire's voice, calm and deliberate, talking about rebuilding identity after emotional burnout. I listened once. She spoke about how she'd mistaken boundaries for control, how she'd confused attention with safety. She never mentioned me by name, but I recognized myself between the lines. It didn't hurt. It just confirmed what I already knew. She was finally learning lessons I'd lived through in silence. Meanwhile, my studio had become something real. A team of 5, a waiting list of clients, and a growing reputation for designs that made people feel safe without feeling trapped. Reporters called it architectural therapy. I didn't correct them. Maybe that's what it was, healing through geometry. One afternoon, I stopped by Barnes & Noble to pick up materials for a client. As I walked past the self-help aisle, I noticed Miles Harland's new book. The title read, When Freedom Fails. The irony almost made me laugh. His photo was smaller this time, his smile more forced. I wondered if Claire ever saw him again, or if she finally realized that liberation sold by another person is just another kind of leash. That night, I came home to my quiet apartment, made dinner, and sat by the window watching the city lights. It wasn't loneliness anymore, it was clarity. People think silence means absence, but in truth, it's space reclaimed. I opened LinkedIn for the first time in weeks and saw a message request from Claire. I didn't open it. I just stared at the small gray icon that said pending. Then I clicked ignore. There was no triumph in it, no bitterness, just completion. Every design ends with a clean line, and that was mine. Before bed, I wrote one more line in Apple Notes, not for her, but for myself. Peace isn't the lack of conflict, it's the presence of structure. Then I turned off the lights. The city went quiet, and in that quiet, I finally understood. Sometimes walking away isn't running. It's just building elsewhere. A year later, my life felt like a blueprint finally finished. The studio thrived, the projects carried my name, and the silence I once feared had become a constant companion, steady, grounding. I'd bought a small house outside the city, minimalist in design, built mostly of glass and stone. Open spaces, clean lines, and a single reinforced wall that ran through the center. Every visitor asked about it. I always said the same thing. That's the line that keeps everything standing. One Saturday morning, while I was sketching in the backyard, a delivery truck pulled up. The driver handed me a small box, no return address. Inside was a framed photo of the two of us from years ago. Attached was a handwritten note. I finally understand. Boundaries are love in their most honest form. I hope you're free, truly. It wasn't signed, but I didn't need a signature. I placed the frame face down on my desk, not out of resentment, but because the past doesn't need to hang on walls built for the future. That evening, I met a client at a quiet restaurant by the lake. A woman architect, new in town, curious about collaboration. We talked for hours, not about emotions or freedom, but about form, proportion, and how silence in design can feel like oxygen. When she laughed, it wasn't forced. It was human, simple, real. Driving home, the night air felt lighter. I parked the car, looked at my reflection in the glass wall of the house, and realized I wasn't rebuilding anymore. I was just living. The noise of the past had faded, leaving room for something quieter but stronger. Before going to bed, I opened Apple Notes one last time and read through the sentences that had marked each phase of my life, the moments between pain and progress. Then I wrote the final line. She thought silence was cold. It was warmth, disciplined into peace. I closed the app, set the phone down, and turned off the lights. The house rested around me, solid, calm, unshaken. She had called my boundaries controlling. But in the end, those same boundaries were the reason I could finally stand without breaking. The quiet wasn't empty anymore, it was home. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.